What were the kinds of things that Ozo solved in a way that you weren't able to find otherwise?
When I was approached with this project from technical leadership, I was already presented with solutions, build versus buy, And so for me, it was really important to first understand what were the core technical gaps that we need to solve, and then how might we build those versus buy potential solutions to solve one or more of those gaps. One, what auth architecture should we use? Now, let me describe a little bit what I mean.
Mhm.
There's, of course, all kinds of models, but then in terms of architecture, we really boiled it down to two. One was a fine grained access model, where everything is modeled as relationships. And the other is a policy model, where you have complete flexibility to create arbitrary conditions to build any type of policy that you'd like. And so these are the two ends of the spectrum, one offering maximum flexibility and capability to build any model you need, and the other providing like a real concise, strict, single way to do things, really hard way to do things wrong. And those were the two contenders. That was one primary question. The second primary question was, how do we scale to meet our growth? Like our demand keeps growing. Webflow is doing very well. And so like, what does the 10x look like for performance scaling, both obviously from the infrastructure side, but as well as like within our organization? The third was, how would we centralize data that we have in a way that makes it easy to use by the authorization service? Because we knew that we have a bunch of data in our system that is needed to make authorization decisions. And so one big question was kind of, how do we untangle that web in a way to leverage it to make authorization decisions without having to rebuild a bunch of stuff? Which is a really good key into the fourth question, which is, how do we interop the existing code base to use the new system? Which I have no doubt every engineer watching this is thinking the same thing. And then more precisely, how do we transition the existing code bases to use the new system? So those were the primary technical things, which boils down to auth architecture, performance and scaling, support, and team enablement. But those were the four dimensions that I went for investigation. And when exploring in-house solutions for those, it became apparent fairly quickly that some of those journeys, specifically around performance and scaling and auth architecture, are very, very expensive endeavors. And so when I started to explore the solution space and what products exist on the market, that's where I actually first kind of learned more about the authorization as a service space. It was new to me. And I learned that these services, in some form, answer all of these questions in one way or another. So it actually became the natural conclusion that it was a build versus buy conversation. And of course, there are some integration points, but I wanted to drive clarity that don't buy unless there's a clear technical and business value in doing so. So for us, there was, and it aligned really well with what these authorization services provide. And to answer your question specifically about which dimensions kind of stood out for OSO, it was, for one, I did a proof of concept, a pretty thorough proof of concept with each vendor, where I built like a Google Drive. Very simple thing, and it was my way to experience it as a developer, to get a sense of how it might scale within our organization for other teams to be able to be successful with it. And in the FGA solutions on the market, when I extrapolate how it would scale for all of our complex use cases across teams, the FGA model becomes very complex and very difficult to understand. On the other side of the spectrum, where you have your policy models, they are inherently flexible. And as such, they are not built with the components in mind that are generally used to create a web application. For example, roles, permissions, resources. These are things for us, we live and breathe. But when you're talking about a general policy engine, you're not talking about a web application. You're talking about building authorization policies for arbitrary systems. And so, although they are very flexible to support your needs, there are not enough constraints to enable a developer organization of vast amounts of talent to succeed without building a lot of guardrails, and that in itself is extremely expensive. And so where OSO really popped is the bridge between the two. Polar is built with this elegant, scalable design that is the 100x thing. You can do anything. as an engineer, when you see the flexibility of that, the tooling that it provides, you can see the potential. And then on the other side of the equation, you have these shiny things like resource blocks, right? That basically provide that layer of fidelity to abstract away some of that complexity so that you can support the majority of the use cases, which are reback, RBAC, FGA, in ways that are more conducive to the language that organizations use. And for me, that was immediately like, aha. Now I know maybe there are some things that A does better than B, but that means that the potential is there. So then the question became, okay, can they handle our scale? Can they handle our like our enterprise-y demands and support needs, right? And then like, what does the development experience look like? What does team enablement look like? What does day one at T0 look like versus, you know, T1? And in every single category, OSO 1. And for those who know me, I'm a stickler when it comes to being objective about reasoning. And I tried so hard to convince myself that you didn't win in any of those categories, and I wasn't able to.